Okay, everyone, welcome to this tech topic on browser debugging. We're going to focus on HTML, CSS, network, and JavaScript today. This is meant to be interactive, so jump in, raise your hand, yell at a question, make comments. There's several people in the room that know way more about this than I do, so if I'm saying something wrong, correct me. Greg, I'm getting feedback. Can you put me on mute or something? Or... Okay, cool.
Yeah, hold on.
So here's our agenda. We're going to talk about debugging in general, tools. We're going to go through examples, HTML, CSS, network, JavaScript, mobile, and we do a React example, and then we'll review, wrap up. So debugging in computer science, most of us, were brought up to learn that, the whole punch card story from Admiral Grace Hopper, where a moth got stuck in her card, was the origination of bug. But I was watching Criminal Minds a couple weeks ago, and the genius on that show was saying, no, it was really Thomas Edison. So I included the Thomas Edison quote from 1878, where he talks about bugs. So I thought that was pretty cool. Learn something new every day. So when I started programming in college, we used print statements. So printf, cout, write line, console. Well, console.log wasn't around back then, but that was how you did debugging. Command line debuggers were just, they were out there. Not a lot of people used them. Some of you may use GDB, XDB. People who know me know I use Firebug and Ruby debug a lot because I love command line debugging. And now we have a lot of graphical debuggers. Most of them are built into an IDE. A lot of you use them. Some of you don't. There's this notion that used to be out that said, real men or women use printf. I think this is nonsense. I think that's wrong. I think you use all the tools you have at your disposal. Some of us like command lines better. Some of us like print statements, but an interactive debugger is really going to often help you solve problems very quickly. So that's debugging. Browser debug history. So those of you that started in the early days, I think my first Netscape browser, had very little capabilities, but some of us used this tool called Vinkman, and Vinkman was really cool back in the day, but it wasn't that cool. It was kind of cool. And then came along, in my opinion, like the game changer, and that was Firebug, and that was written by this guy Joe Hewitt. He's my hero because Firebug, I feel like, saved my life. It was like I went from the dark ages to like awesomeness overnight, and I went from hating browser stuff to loving it. And he also created IUI as a framework that's pretty much defunct now, but it made web browsers work like iPhones, which was really cool. He worked at Facebook pre-IPO, so I looked up what he's doing now, and he's growing tomatoes. He's a gardener, so must be nice.
What was his name?
What's that? What year? I believe it was 10 years ago today. Yep, 06. Well, not today, but 06. I don't know exactly when, but roughly about 10 years ago, Firebug came out. Huh?
April Fool's.
April Fool's, yeah. I was going to wear my shirt backwards the whole time and see if you guys noticed, but I figured that was a little childish. All right, so let's talk about tools. So as you know, Firebug was my original favorite, and most of the time you run that in Firefox. It runs other places, but it was really meant to run in Firefox, and that was where the greatness started. Recently, Firefox came out with Firefox Developer Tools, which is pretty much a complete ripoff of Firebug, but it's built into the browser. Chrome came out with Chrome Developer Tools, which is a complete ripoff of Firebug, but much better. IE came out with IE Developer Tools, which is very similar to all these, but not quite as good in many ways, but better in a couple. Safari, again, they joined the club. And then I'm going to show you some Xcode and how to tie that in with the emulator to Safari, something I learned pretty recently, which is really cool. So again, we're going to talk about HTML, CSS, network, and JavaScript. So let's jump in. Oh, before we jump in, now you're going to start your path to becoming a debugging Jedi. So I got some fun Yoda quotes for you guys. So let's start with HTML and CSS debugging. one thing you have to learn about invalid HTML is it works most of the time, and unfortunately, I sort of wish browsers would be like more violent and go, "This is wrong. We're not doing anything," but instead, they really try hard to know what you meant instead of what you said. So this helps you because you can write really crummy HTML, but it hurts you in that it's a time bomb in your code, kind of waiting to go off. One of the great things about like programming in React for the last month is it's violent. Like if you don't get it right, it's like no way, forget it. Like if your HTML isn't even perfectly valid or your XML, then it will just barf all over you, which I do kind of like. So let's jump into a demo. So I'm going to start with my old favorite, Firefox and Firebug. And you can install Firebug as an add-on still, inspect the element with Firebug. And so this is a sort of a, let me refresh it so I get it back to my normal state. So this is a, vanilla login page. It has a client login and a password and a login button. It's pretty simple, not a whole lot going on here. So one of the things I really like about Firebug is that it allows add-ons itself. So it has like an add-on architecture, and it has this cool add-on called Validator. So remember how I said invalid HTML is bad? Let's start by checking our HTML. So I challenge you to run this on any of our apps. I bet you a lot of our apps have errors or warnings. I bet you very few of our apps have no warnings. I bet you most of them have at least warnings, if not some errors. So let's take a look at this. So it says bad value user email address for attribute on element label. ID must not contain a white space. Okay, so let's go take a look at my code, line 42. Get over to test number 1. So if we go down to line 42, indeed there is a space here, and that's bad. And I think this was created by the Rails label for and somebody jamming in something that tried to look nice, and probably me. That was creating that warning. So now that we have that, we fixed that. Let's go ahead and refresh, validate again. On line 76, there's a stray end of div tag. Ooh, that one's going to get me later for sure. So let's go take a look at that. Good. As you can see here, there's a div. It's not matched up with any other div, a closed div. All the HTML is rendering fine, but if I go and insert something later and things go horribly wrong, I'm gonna be like, why does this not work? My new code's probably perfectly correct, but I had this time bomb sitting out there. So let's go ahead and fix that. Refresh. Validate. And one last one. So line 42, the for label must refer to a non-hidden form control. So I went and fixed that form label, but I didn't actually make it point to the correct form element. So if we look, user email address actually points to user email. So what I should have done was this. And so this is a label for this element. So let's go ahead and refresh. Cool. Now I get the big green check mark. My HTML is good. Very cool. Okay, so let's look at some of the other capabilities. So one of the cool things is that we can just inspect any element of the DOM by right-clicking, inspect element with Firebug. And this will take us right to that DOM element. Notice when I hover over it in Firebug, it highlights the field. If I hover over the label, it highlights that. So I don't like my title here. My code is just like way too small. So I'm going to go over here and go, oh, okay, well, why is that so small? So let's look and go down and go down and go down and go down and go down. Oh, the font size is 14. So can we make that 48? Oh, not 484. That's bad. But notice when I make the change right in here, it automatically updates. So this is really cool if you're like, I'm not sure how big I want it to be. 35 and now 45. It looks a little better. 55. And you kind of just play with it until you get it to the right spot you want it. So you can do the same thing. So this is just temporarily fixing it. And this is in Bootstrap, so I can't really fix it in Bootstrap. But what I can do is I'm on that branding class. I can just click on my CSS, and I can actually use this to find within here and go down to branding and go font size 48. Oops, 48 pixels. And notice that goes ahead and updated my font size. So now that's kind of really where I want it. I can go back and save it in my own code, but just it lets me play within the browser without having to reload the page, without having to do anything else. Another cool thing here is the layout. So if I want to go look at this and try to understand why it is the way it is, when I hover over it, you'll notice that there's the blue and the yellow. That's, has the margin, border, and padding. I'm not going to move my mouse, but if you look at the bottom right of the screen, it's kind of showing you how everything's sorted out. And so if you ever get into a problem where you're like, why is that way? You can use this. It looks kind of funky because I'm scrunched from the projector, but it'll actually show you sort of what the layout is. And I find that really useful.
Hey, Joel, before you go too farther on the style side of things,
yep.
Go back to style. One of the things I would point out is, I'm not sure, I don't use Firebug too much, but you scroll to the top of that window.
Mm-hmm.
Is there, okay, so at least in Chrome, when you look at style, you actually have a section where you can override and use style. So you can add a style. That's often pretty useful. Second thing is, it's pretty hierarchical with the classes that are being applied, going down, 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 down. You can see what's been perhaps overridden by another class that has a matching style.
Yeah, so this is a good example of that. If I click on my call MD6, it comes from Bootstrap, but you can actually see that my code CSS is overriding it somehow down here with the min height.
Right? And then there's the computed, which I assume looks pretty similar. But the computed style kind of combines everything and says,
this is
these
the final answer.
Applied.
Yeah. So computed tells you the final answer, and then style tells you where you got it from, which Jeff's great. That's a great point. You can use that to help track down. One of the biggest problems most of us have is CSS is like specificity. So the most specific style wins, right? And so usually when something's not working right, it's not because you just boneheadedly didn't put the style in. It's because something less specific is matching than what, or something that you didn't intend that was more specific is matching your style.
I think it's incredible you have to check mark and turn individual style elements off, so you can try to figure out which one is overridden.
Yep.
And you turn it off and see what.
Great, good point. And we'll do a little bit in Chrome too. I hadn't planned on doing a lot of CSS in Chrome, trying to jump across all browsers. But okay, so that's Firebug. Not too many people use Firebug anymore. It's pretty. A lot of browsers have, like I said, have it built in, and so it's a little easier just to use the built-in tools. But there's nothing wrong with it. It works. I'm trying to get the bottom corner here. Hang on one sec. Oh boy. Okay. So I just want to show one feature. So if you do inspect element versus inspect element with Firebug, this will open up the built-in Firefox tools, which again are very similar. You have your inspector, you have your console, you have your debugger, your style editor. You can do performance stuff, network stuff. But one cool thing you can do here that you can't do in Firebug, at least that I know of, is, let me go back to my inspector here. Sorry, this is a little tough to see because move the console down here. Is responsive. So if I want to turn on responsive, I click this little button. Of course, there we go. Now I'm seeing my page as if it was being displayed on a small device. And so I can go around and play with device sizes. I can rotate my device. Actually, if I go over here, this is a different one. Notice I get the hamburger screen when I'm, the hamburger screen. This looks like a hamburger. That shows up only when I'm in emulation mode. If I cut it out, I don't see any hamburger, right? So it's a good way you can just quickly test your responsiveness of your website across a bunch of different things. Now notice it's not monkeying with the user agent. So this is something a little bit different than Chrome does. And I know Chrome does it better before somebody jumps in and says that. So I'll show you how Chrome does it better in a minute. But it's a good thing to understand what this can do. One cool thing I don't know that Chrome does is simulating touch events. So this will actually let you simulate touch events. So if you're writing touch-specific JavaScript, this will let you simulate that, which I don't know if Chrome does. I don't think it does. So there's, it does? Okay, cool. All right. Of course it does, right? All right, so that's an overview of, huh? Oh, cool. So that's an overview of HTML and CSS. Anybody have any questions on that before I go on to the next topic? Okay. Okay. Oh, wait. So before we wrap up on that one, so takeaway, make sure you validate your HTML. Firebug's one way, but there's 100 other ways. Put your styles in a CSS file, please. Understand the browser support for your CSS feature. I included a link that talks about if you're using some of the advanced HTML5 features, different browsers at different versions start supporting all these things. And so it's important to know if you're doing something really fancy. I was doing something fancy with touch events, and it wasn't working. I couldn't figure out why, and I just kind of finally looked and was like, oh, it's not supported in that browser. Duh. Like, and I spent an hour on it. So before you try to implement something, make sure you know where it'll work. Use a CSS framework like Bootstrap. It'll save you time. Debug your CSS issues using the tools. It'll help you move quicker. Okay. So network debugging. So when we load a web page, we're not just making one network call. The HTTP protocol takes down that first page and it parses it, and then it basically, for everything contained in that page, is going to make a whole bunch of network calls to go get all the resources. So any CSS files that you have externalized, any JavaScript files you have externalized, any image files you have externalized, it's going to go and get those. Most browsers do between 2 and 8 threads to go get that concurrently. So if you have 100 resources on your page, it's only going to be able to go and get them, say, 6 or 7 at a time, depending on the current browser you have. So we'll go we'll go take a look at that and come back. So now I'm going over to Chrome. So this used to be awesome. Like when you would go to Google and you would turn on the network tab and you do a refresh, you would just get 2 network calls. It was so awesome. One for like tiny little JS file, and Google has decided to take rid of that policy, and now we're up to 12 requests, which is still pretty tight for a modern day web page. 12 would probably be on the small side. But if you take a look at here, each one of these network requests are for an element. So this is for the main page, this is for an image, this is for another image, for another image, for another image, and JavaScript files. This shows you how long they took. You can actually click on them and look at the headers. So you can look at the HTTP headers and the response headers. So if you want to debug something, you can take a look through this and look for issues. One issue that we well, there's a few. Used to worry about keep alive a lot. Now pretty much every modern browser and server has keep alive turned on by default. What that is when your browser makes a connection, it gets the answer back. It just holds that open and keeps getting stuff over and over. Saves that setup and teardown of the connection every time. I noticed actually when I was debugging iOS, Safari on iOS seems not to do that. It actually seems to close. So it's kind of interesting. If you're building a page for Safari iOS, then you have to be a little bit more cognizant of the number of resources, I guess, because of that teardown. But also, one thing we like to make sure if we have slow servers is the compression. So you'll see accept encoding. I don't see it on this one. Yeah, there it is. So accept encoding gzip, and you'll see when the request comes back that it's actually compressed. So what they're doing is the server is gzip compressing the answer, and then it's coming down to your browser, knows that from the header, and it's uncompressing it and displaying it. So this saves a lot when you have slow network pipe, but the trade-off is your browser is now doing unzipping. So if you have a really big fast machine and a really slow network, then compression is always a great answer. If you have a really great network and a really slow machine, then it might not be so great, right? So, anyway, so as something in contrast, let's look at the Solution Street's Facebook page, and let's do a load of this. And so, just to give you an idea how out of hand this can get. Yeah. So we're 272 requests just to load the page, and as you guys know, Facebook is going to be chatty. I left this one open for a day or two, and it was like, whoa. So the timeline will go on and on. You can see everything that got loaded, but 11 megs to download this page. I mean, I'm pretty sure on my modem in college it would have taken a week to download this page. So it shows you how far we've come in terms of network performance, but also how much we're making use of it, I guess you could say in this case. Some people would say abuse, but it really depends on your point of view. Is your goal to have a very rich content page with lots of stuff on it, or is your goal to get them to do something very quickly and efficiently with the minimum amount of wait time? I think that's all I'm going to talk about. I'm going to come back to timeline a little bit later when we talk about performance. Arthur did another talk about network throttling. I'm not going to talk about that today, but it is possible with Chrome to throttle your network, and watch his video if you want to learn all sorts of awesome, interesting things about that. Does anybody have any questions?
You mentioned that there was a certain number of threads in the browser allocate towards making requests. Is there any way to know how many threads are being used per request and figure that?
I don't know about, well, each request is one thread, right? And so this is telling you kind of current modern day browsers, like how many parallel ones they'll let. So Chrome, I don't know what version one, this may be out of date, but 6 threads roughly. So each request is going to be a thread. And so if you had 18 resources on your page, it's going to do 6. And then when those are all done, it's going to do 6. Well, it's going to do 1. And if that thread's done, it'll go start the 7th one. But the first 6 are going to go in like blam right together. And then there'll be, if let's say they took 3 seconds each, there'll be like a 3-second pause. And then blam, 6 more, 3-second pause, blam. In reality, they're all staggered, right? So, but I don't know if any way to control it. So you're like, hey, get my quick stuff first or anything like that. Or stagger in slow and quick stuff. I'm not aware of anything that can do that. It's possible, but.
Does the browser automatically cache your page?
So it's complicated. Let's go back to here. And so there's several different headers that we can look at that determine whether it caches it or not. So let's look at this. So there's cache control, right? So in this case, it's saying private, no cache, no store, must revalidate. But there's also a pragma no cache there too. That's another one. But let's look at one that wants to cache. And you should have an E tag and a modified since, hopefully. Let's grab an image because I don't think they want you to go get the image for real, do they? Yeah, cache control private max age. So this tells you how long it'll last. And then the next time you go get it, which let me do this again without a shift refresh and see if it does. Oops.
The network.
Yeah, so in the network shows it's cached, but so you should get a different answer back this time. Sorry. Yeah, from cache. So E tag, cache control, modified since. There's a bunch of different ways to do it, but yeah, all good things to think about when we're building our apps too. Good point. Okay, let's go back to our deck. Okay, so my takeaways for networking: minify your JS. So there's a bunch of packages out there that'll take your JS and like compress it down for you. So that'll save bandwidth and time. Package your assets. So Instead of having 50 JavaScript files, if you can have all 50 of your JavaScript files combined into one JavaScript file, that'll save a number of network hits. There's a trade-off to that, right? So if you have like section part of the site A that never uses any JavaScript, and section part of the site B that uses like 3 megs worth of JavaScript, you may not want to go and download that for section A because they just want to do this, and these guys never go over this. Now, if it's all packaged in one big file and you cache it for a week, then you could say, hey, it's negligible. But let's say they're on a really crummy radio network and they don't have any, the people that use section A of the site don't have good bandwidth, and they don't ever want to download that big JS file. So, you know, depending on how much you want to optimize, it may not be always the right answer to do that, but this is general purpose business system. Keep alive, I'm pretty sure this is like standard now. I don't think you have to worry about it. Turn on compression though is not always standard. We've ran into a few apps now where we were like, whoa, why are we not doing compression? So look at your web server, look at IIS or Apache or Nginx or whatever you're doing. How to use the network tool, link in Chrome. Another Yoda quote. I think that's it for networking. Any questions?
So this is really, this might be a stupid question, but if my browser can make concurrent requests, and my JavaScript file, if I have one Mongo JavaScript file, would it not be better to split it up into 2 or 3 so it grabs smaller JavaScript files all at once? Multiple requests?
It depends. Like most of the time, you need all the stuff right for your page. I mean, you kind of have it all bundled together. There's some dependency tree of this depends on this, depends on this. So if you have it in 2 files, you might risk like one being loaded and the other not being there. So the having one file lets you order everything in the right order and have it all at once, so you don't have any kind of missed dependencies or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I think you're getting into like the outlying use cases of, yeah, you might have some way to optimize partial loads. Or you could go back to the old school, which some people in this room prefer, which is like just having a little bit of JavaScript on each page. There's a place, time and a place for everything. Okay, so let's talk about JavaScript debugging. JavaScript gives your page life. I'm going to go over breakpoints, variables, stepping, sending, console logging, and breakpoints in code versus UI. So let's jump into this. I don't understand why my screen zips up like that every single time. Okay, so I have a test 2 is a simple first name, last name, submit, and then I have a couple divs, one that shouldn't have a border and one that should have a border. So I don't have a border around the div on the bottom that should have a border. So I want to debug this. So I want to figure out what happened. And so if you see when I open up my sources tab, it takes me right to my test2 HTML page, and you can see that I have a div called myDiv, and it should be surrounded in a red border, and I have one asset called test2.js. So let's go take a look at that file. And all this does is says, hey, when the document's ready, I want to log the length of the div to make sure that element's there, because when you call .length in jQuery, it'll tell you it'll be 1 if the div's there. And I want to set that to the border to 3 pixel red. And I also want to set my last name to Nyland, which you see actually happened. And then I want to register a click handler. So I see last name Nyland. When I hit submit, I get an alert. So that all works. But for some reason, the red border's not there. And so I'm using the old school method here to log. So this is printf, and saying, hey, in my console, my div is 0. So it's not there. Does anybody have any idea what I did wrong? What am I missing? Right. So I missed an I. Instead of copying and pasting, I tried to type, and I'm old, so I can't see that well. So now I'm going to run this, and oops, I didn't fix it in my code. I fixed it there. So let me fix it in my code. Yeah, exactly. You can. There's a way in Chrome where you can save it and it'll fix it and persist. But I'm not a big fan of that because I think you're then inclined to like forget it later and go back.
It's really, it really is random. So change it in Chrome, then you'll refresh it there.
Right.
I never took the time to try to figure out why it's doing it. But if you're in a hurry or you really want to check out something, you can give it a try.
Good old reliable. Okay, so now I fixed my bug and I have my awesome red border. So you know what? I want to use the real debugger in C. So I can just put debugger in my JavaScript code anywhere. And this will cause most tools to stop, which is kind of cool. Jeff just taught me this last week. So I always had just like loaded it and then went and found like, you know, you can go in here and click the breakpoint and it'll stop there. But like if you have like a big page with like 80 resources, it's hectic finding it. So this is like a slick way of like, hey, I know where my problem is. I'm just going to throw a debugger in there and make it stop. So I think that's pretty cool. Learn something new every day. So once I'm in, most tools will let you hover and show you what it is. So this shows you that, you know, the selector work, the links one, I can drill down into different things. If I want to look at, you know, this one, I can look at it. You can also, this shows you the links one. You can also add watch variables over here. So if you're trying to debug stuff, you can often just go in here and add a watch variable. You know, I don't know, dollar my d, yeah, the wrong way, dot length. So 0. So call stack in here can be used. Let's see what else. Breakpoints, stepping, so you step over, you can step over, you can step into, you can step out of, you can stop, play, just like any other debugger you've ever used. So setting breakpoints in here, you can do these. One thing, you know, wonky when you set it here and then you reload, if you add 3 lines, breakpoints are all going to be in the wrong spot. It's another reason that maybe you want to use debugger in the code sometimes. That's the basics. Anybody have any questions? I do not know what that is. Oh, cap async stack traces. Okay, yeah. I think I do know what that is actually. So in JavaScript, a lot of things happen asynchronously. You know, think about any HTTP request you do. And so I'm guessing what that does, if you check that, if you do something asynchronously and you get a stack trace, that's going to capture it and dump it in the log somewhere, I guess. We'll play with that afterwards. One more thing I wanted to show you real quickly, since I got my VM fired up, is IE tools. And IE tools, I'm not going to go through in detail. They do almost everything that Chrome tools do and Firefox tool and Firefox. One really cool thing they do that none of those do is they let you sort of kind of emulate different versions of IE. So if you click this link here, then it'll let you go to IE 7, 9, 10, 5, no 6 for some reason. You know, wonder why. I don't know why they skipped the best, Steve. It's so weird. I was looking at it last night. I was like, okay, I just figured they would stop at 7, but the fact that they have 5 makes you, 5 must be like, you know, 1 meg big or something, and they just slammed it in there for fun. Visual Studio, yeah. In the olden days, Mason's mentioning, if you had a JavaScript bug, there was like a certain set of things you could do where it would just like suck it into Visual Studio and kind of sort of work, but half the time it didn't work. It was real sketchy. And from my remembering, it was only JavaScript. Like you couldn't do any DOM related stuff. But yeah, way, way better now. Again, this made us all not hate IE nearly as much. Okay, any other questions?
So while you're on here, a couple things I mentioned is, it might be obvious to everybody else, but on the call stack, if you actually wanted to go down the stack or up the stack, you can always double click on it. Pieces down the stack and it'll go that way.
Yep.
The other thing with the debugger trick, if you're using like a view templating language, JS or mustache. You can use that debugger trick in your view templates too, as long as you're in the JavaScript OD area. That can be really helpful because if you've ever worked with somebody's company, it's sometimes really hard to find the JavaScript EJS file in your console. So just throwing a debugger in there will at least get the file open and that line of code file in EJS. Then you can maybe set your debug debug statements.
Okay, make sure you use a consistent approach for your JavaScript across your whole application. And, you know, in my opinion, I joked about the person that put JavaScript in line. For me, the key thing is that you do everything the same in the application. There's a bunch of different, you know, if we take a step back, we talked about unobtrusive JavaScript versus obtrusive JavaScript versus now everything is JavaScript and obtrusive HTML, right? Or not obtrusive HTML. But for me, what is important on our projects is that whatever we agree on, everybody does it the same way. And that comes to where the JavaScript's located, how it's packaged, how it's used. Are we using ES6? Are we not? Are we doing scoping? Are we not? Are we using jQuery? Are we not? The worst thing in the world is if we have, like, you know, one person using framework X, another person using framework Y, some people doing inline, some people doing an external file. That's, to me, the killer that's going to hurt us the most. For production, minify and compress all your files into one. For development, make sure you don't. Those of us that have had to deal with some people that deliver, some vendors that deliver compressed libraries only, debugging can be a nightmare. I won't name any names. Check the console first. Almost all the time when I'm trying to figure out what the heck is going wrong, and I'm trying to use the debugger, and something's not right, there's an error in the console. So like the debugger is going off of some old version, or it's not even working right because there's an error in the console. So look at the console. Look, there's almost always an error there if things are weird. When things get weird, restart the browser. A lot of times, like, we're debugging and then we're just like, oh, refresh the page. Oh, refresh the page. Oh, refresh the page. And I think that causes memory leaks, and it eventually will cause some of your browsers to just start acting really, really crazy. So, all right, any questions? Got to go real quick. I'm a little behind here. So, okay, performance. So I said JavaScript can bring life to your page. It can also kill your page. So we're going to use Chrome timeline to take a look and profile a little bit. I'm going to go fairly quickly on this one because I don't want to spend too much time. Okay, so let's look at test 3. Okay, so just for fun, I created a grid of Monday through Fridays, like enter your hours, and when you tab out, it kind of adds your all hours, and nobody would ever do this, right? So, but I created a page of like 100 of these just to see how ugly things can get. So I'm going to go to timeline and hit refresh. And the cool thing about timeline is we'll record everything that's going on. So it'll look at networking, it'll look at your profile of CPU utilization, memory utilization, you know, how everything's rendered. You can do screenshots as it goes. Gobs and gobs of information here. I'm not going to go into too much detail because we could spend an hour just on this. But one thing I just kind of like noticed here is like, look at your JavaScript, figure out what's going on. In this case, you know, I started with like the old school way. I know nobody does this, but I just put like on-click, on blurs on each of the fields, right? So, so in that case, like it generated 722 listeners. So that's a lot of memory, right? And my heap is now up to 26, 28 megs, something like that. So just as a quick fix, I was like, hey, you know, that seems just like maybe I can get those listeners down, right? So I created another page just like that one, but instead of doing on blur on every one of them, I did unobtrusive JavaScript, and I added a jQuery, hey, you know, on this class blur, right? I'm like, that should be way better, so much better, right? Everyone agree? It's going to go from like 700 down to like nothing, like 12 or 4. Let's run that. 720, that looks a lot like the other one. Okay, well, I was shocked on that, so I'm not going to explain why, but we can talk about that offline if anybody wants to say why. But then I said, you know what, let me use table delegate. So this is just all in the table. Delegate everything that has a class, hours field, blur function to calling this function. Let's do that instead. That's got to be better, right? So I have my awesome timeline function. I'm just refresh the page. No, it says 7:05. All right, right? What's going on? Sorry. 21. What happened there? No, every 10, right? Yeah, one for everything and then one for the top. Much better, right? But why the first time didn't it show up? Oh no, well, oh that one, yeah. But after I changed it, it still showed me 720. Well, I didn't clear my stuff, right? And it cached it. So I cleared it all. I refreshed. It looks good. Anyway, there's another feature I want to show you really quick. Profiles. So you can record heap allocations while this all happens. You can record CPU utilization. You can take heap snapshots. I mean, this is awesome. Use all this stuff. When things get really slow, it's great. We used to have to pay thousands of dollars to get a tool to do this in Java, right? And this is like free in your browser. No reason not to use it. So I'm not going to go into total detail on it. Timeline, profiles, you can record your heap. You can take your CPU snapshots. Going back into my presentation, I put a few links in here for you. One is common JavaScript. Well, one is how to use the timeline. The next one is like 25 JavaScript performance optimizations. Another one's like how not to write bad JavaScript. Really good reads. I learned a lot when I read them, so take a look at those. Key things, make sure you understand what your JavaScript is doing. I think for the last 15 years of my career, I've been just copying and pasting JavaScript in because I didn't consider it like a real thing. It was just like, hey, I need my page to do this, so I'm just going to go get this bit and copy it in here. I have no idea how it works. We can't do that anymore. We all have to understand what's going on, how it works, why it doesn't work. Pull logic outside of loops if possible. This is standard programming stuff. Keep DOM traversal and manipulation to a minimum. We'll talk about virtual DOM real quick with React. Careful with those XPath selectors. That's what Prashant was mentioning as to why my first implementation, the class selector, wasn't quite doing what we wanted it to do. Keep your DOM small if possible. Don't create variables you don't need. And then, again, keep binding to a minimum. So those are some good best practices. Any quick questions on that?
On that timeline?
Yeah.
If you had a page that was doing a bunch of stuff and at the very end it redirected to some other page, I was troubleshooting something and I wanted that first timeline. I think that async thing is what you talk on that?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think though you can do a start and stop. I think, you know what I mean? Like, here, let me. Right.
It wasn't even Ajax though. It was basically one server something. Server, yeah. Out of my control.
So capture a new line, take the record toolbar. So there's a record toolbar somewhere in here. And so I think if you hit stop before it redirects, then you might, yeah, I guess, yeah. Or you have to just put in some special code not to do that so you can save off the profile. Once you've done this, you can save it to a file and then you can load it back up a day, a week, a month later. So yeah, so if you look here, here, anywhere over here, I think you right click and say save timeline data and it'll let you save it to a file. And then you can go back and load it later to play with it. Okay. Okay, iPhone, iPad, Safari debugging. This is something I just learned, and I'll just do 2 minutes because it's fun. So when you're building Safari, iOS apps, like the best thing to do is just to use Chrome, and the emulator is really awesome. So you can just turn on. So if you noticed when I was in Firefox and I turned on responsive.js, this is what my page looked like. So I just took my normal page and shrunk it down. And because I'm using some nice CSS, it kind of looks okay. But over here in Chrome, what I'm actually doing is doing iPhone 6 simulation. And when I load it in there, it actually looks totally different. And this is using actually IUI, because this app was written 8 years ago. So it looks like an iPhone app. And the cool thing is Chrome is like spoofing your user agent. And so it's actually, trying to make everything look good. This is like 96% foolproof. Like it gets you 96% of the way there. You can fix almost everything. But there's 4% of bugs that you can encounter that happen on your iPhone and they don't happen in Chrome. And so for that, what I recommend is Xcode. And so Xcode has, it's free for anybody that has a Mac. If you don't need a Mac, you can borrow one if you wanted to play. Open up the developer tools and do iOS Simulator. And this will let you load up any of their devices. So you can go into hardware, device, and you can pick any one of them, iPhone 4 through 6. They don't have the new ones yet, I don't think. Maybe I just haven't updated my iOS. Retina, iPads, everything. And so this is really awesome to debug this 4% that you can't get in Chrome. But the problem is I can't really debug, right? So it's a simulator. If I right-click on it, nothing works. So it's cool that I can see the problem, but it's really hard to figure out what the cause of the problem is. So Apple was awesome, and they came up with this cool idea. So if you go to Safari, and you go to developer, the developer bar here, and you go to user, iOS simulator, and then you pick your URL there. It basically pops up their dev tools for here, let's go back here. And so now I can do JavaScript debugging. I can do element highlight. Look at this. Ooh. Awesome, huh? So you can't point on this sucker, but if you go over here to this thing, I don't know what they call it, and you click on it, and then you go like, that, then it'll take you right to that spot. So this to me was like, of those 4% really difficult bugs you can find, now I can actually find them, solve them, fix them, and this looks actually, the cool thing, about the emulator is that, let's open up one of these suckers. It actually has, Chrome doesn't do a good job on the camera integration. So we have this cool, or not this one, sorry. We have this cool, like picture of a plane, and you're like, hey, there's a scratch here. On your emulator, when you choose the file, it actually pops up the camera roll. So you can actually pick something from the camera roll versus on Chrome, like it's your OS file. So it's a little bit more real. So that's kind of cool. Anybody have any questions on that? Okay, last but not least, React.js. So get back here. So again, those of you that are in the room that have been doing React full-time or were doing React full-time for a month know way more than I do. So, but I'll just tell you what I learned in my time. So if you're doing React, it's sort of like doing a bunch of compiling of your code into HTML and JavaScript on the fly, right? So you can't really debug using the traditional tools in exactly the same way. So let's just jump right into it. So I'm using the Firefox React add-on. And those of you that read the newsletter, this is the tool I built this month in this month's newsletter. So if you go and look and you do inspect element and you look at the HTML for this baby, it's ugly. It's just not. It's not like real. Actually, this doesn't look terrible, but it's like these data React IDs. It's just not correct. But if you go to the React add-on, it actually shows you the true React DOM. And so you can go through and look at all the React DOM components, the elements. So it's giving you what you kind of had in the old world now in React. So if you can also mess with your state. So over here, we have state and props in React land. Sorry for those who don't know React display little thing. You can just go in there and update your state, and it'll update your page accordingly. So I added like 1, 2, 3, my username, and it went ahead and added that there. So it's pretty cool in terms of that. Debugger, you can do the same thing. So it works pretty well. It gets a little squirrely when you get into stuff like JSX. So when you get down into like here, it's not perfect, but it's usually good enough to like find your problem. But this again is where it really comes in handy using that debugger, like Jeff says, because you're like, I don't know exactly what line number this translates to in the real JavaScript world versus my React world. So that can be pretty cool. Anything else I should talk real quick about, Jeff? Okay, cool. All right, just have 1 minute left. Any questions?
Oh, well, you know what? The other one is that $R. You can type in the console, $R, whatever.
Oh, cool. Thanks. Great. Something new over there. States, props, talks about virtual DOM, changes state. Okay, good. Okay, so you're now on your path to becoming a debugging Jedi Master. Debugging is fun. This is my favorite part about software, is like solving problems. Each browser has their own tool. Be great at one tool and be good at least one more, right? So don't just confine yourself to Chrome because it's awesome. Try something else, right? It's okay to be great at Chrome tools, but be good at, I don't know, Firefox or IE or Safari developers tools as well. So we talked about HTML, CSS, network, JavaScript, mobile, and React. That is it. Any final questions? If you want to learn more about React.js, read my article in the newsletter. It will tell you everything to do. Thank you. That was like a planted question. Any other questions? All right.
One of the things that they've added recently is like they recommend adding some blocks in JavaScript and CSS above the code.
Right. Okay. Cool. Google page speed. Okay. Cool. I'll add it in there.
One other thing, now with Node, JavaScript server.
Yep.
It's exactly the same debugging.
Cool. So you use Chrome as well,
Yeah.
or whatever tool you want.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I forgot to mention is like the console in Chrome is awesome. Like just if you want to just like run some JavaScript code, just paste it right in there. So like we're doing interviews, like we're always like impressed when they just like pull up the Chrome console and they just start coding, because kind of like the Ruby console or whatever other programming languages, it lets you just start rocking and rolling. So you can just. We could use JS Fiddle as well. I like that because you can do the HTML, and if you're doing something with both, that's really useful. Also, in my article, I talk a little bit about this, but in GitHub, they let you host a web page, and it'll be like your .github.io. You get like one free web page. But the cool thing is like you can put your source out there, and you can have a runnable web page, like with your tool. So if you want to build like some cool JavaScript tool and share the source with everyone, you can just like stick it up there for free, but you only get one SJS.
Right, well, and if I remember correctly, too, you want to know that you're going to do that almost before you start your project, because I think once you have your repo up there, kind of, you can't just think, as far as I remember when I first looked into it, you can't just take an existing repository and be like, okay, let's publish this. It has to do like under a special name.
Yeah. You can? Oh, sweet. All right. Well, you're going to teach Jeff and I how to do that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.